Hello and welcome to the Musical Instrument Investigator. We've got a bit of a news video today, although it's a couple of days old, the news, but unless you kind of follow the auction scene or unless you are subscribed to some of the classical music websites, you might not be aware of this. But Ingles and Hayday announced a few days ago that they'll be selling 70 instruments from the private collection of leading violin expert Norman Rosenberg, who unfortunately passed away in February. Now, Norman's not a person that I met, but I believe that he attended auctions kind of almost religiously and was very well known by players and people in the auction scene. And he was quite important to quite a lot of musicians. He collected instruments, sometimes sold them, I believe, but he in general loved musical instruments, and he helped a lot of musicians out. Before we get into just quickly talking about kind of the instruments that are up for sale here, because what's happening is Ingles and Hayday are going to sell these instruments in two auctions in March and June 2023. We also see a handwritten list that we'll go over later from Norman. They have prepared quite a nice kind of introduction to Norman, and there's a couple of kind of paragraphs here from some of the musicians that he helped, because I must say that he was kind of regarded as like a very kind of lovely gentleman who was very kind of honest and fair, and he just wanted to help musicians, and he also loved collecting instruments. So this article is a really good overview of that. I don't want to read this whole article because I feel it's a bit of a disservice to the author, but I will put a link in the description, and I definitely recommend that you read it. But I will read a couple of parts that kind of I think sum things up fairly well. Firstly, the introduction here. So Norman Rosenberg, who died in February 2022 at the age of 95, was one of a kind, an old school gent with a twinkle in his eye. He always stood slightly apart in the violin world. He was only ever interested in the fiddles themselves, but his expertise was acknowledged as among the very best. Not only did he have a superb eye and memory for recognising instruments, but he also had an excellent ear and a code of honour, making him the player's friend. Born in Liverpool in 1926, Rosenberg taught himself the violin, inspired by recordings of Heifetz and Chrysler and the concerts to which his grandfather took him. He came from a family of antiques dealers, including his father, who had violins in his shop. Combining these skills and passions, he sold his first instrument, aged only 20, by buying an 1880 Colin Mazat at a local sale room for £6, doing it up and selling it for £8. He was on his way. So that basically, I think, sums up Norman Rosenberg, really. Just a lover of instruments, wanting to stay on the moral side of instrument dealing, which is quite difficult for some people to adhere to, I think, and historically it can be a bit of an interesting world, and he just wanted to help out musicians. So I just wanted to give a bit of a background for that, and I just want to kind of quote here a bit. I think this is with an interview with Joshua Fisher, who's a professor of violin at the Royal Academy of Music, who was a friend of his and one of the students that he helped here. I think this is another kind of paragraph which really sums this up quite nicely. In a business where deals are often made and unmade by alliances, Rosenberg stayed outside the game by choice and looked at some of the more nefarious practices. Fisher remembers, he told me that years before he had found a sleep in an auction room and bid up to the level where he bought it. This market price was a lot higher than the other dealers who were bidding together would have gone to. Sometime afterwards, he was approached to join that group, and he turned them down flatly. He didn't want to be involved in the ring, as he called it. This is quite an interesting paragraph because historically, so I hear, this is kind of how a lot of auctions went, and not just musical instruments really. I think this is lots of different fields in antiques where dealers would kind of either agree who would buy this and who would buy that, or they'd kind of gang up together to buy things, and if people outside of the circle bought things, and it caused a bit of a controversy. So historically, I think that's how things went. I think some of those practices still occur now, unfortunately, and there are some nefarious people, but I think in a world of of those kind of goings on. Norman, I believe, from what people have told me, like I said, I do know a few people that knew him personally, that he was not that type of person. He was a genuine person, so that's very good. This collection of instruments, I believe that most of the auction houses were really kind of after this collection. They were, I suppose, in a way, waiting for the day that this would come up, because it's quite significant. It seems that Ingles and Hayday were chosen either by Norman himself or by his family. I'm sure we'll not really 100% know what the deal is with that, but anyway, this is meant to be a news bulletin. I'm going on a bit long, but anyway, I do recommend that you read this article in full, because it's really interesting, and like I said, there's some notes from some of the students that he helped back in the day, and it's just very informative. So yeah, just to kind of go back to the main subject here after my ramblings, a collection of 70 instruments that made up the private collection of leading violin expert Norman Rosenberg will be sold by Ingles and Hayday at 2 auctions in March and June 2023. Here's a picture of him there in his kind of younger days, and you see him kind of a bit older in some of these pictures, so definitely worth looking at that, and I'll put the link in the description. So just to kind of reiterate here, born in Liverpool in 1926, Rosenberg fell in love with the sound of the violin at an early age, listening to Heifetz and Kreisler recordings, and taught himself to play. Came from a family of antique dealers, and these two early influences formed his passion for the instruments themselves. He sold his first violin at the age of 20 and never looked back. These influences also mean that not only did he have a superb eye for the detail and construction of instruments, which made his opinion one of the most reputed in the business, but he had a player's ear for sound. The collection therefore represents prime examples of each of the maker's work, combining both fine workmanship with superb sound. Rosenberg loved instruments so deeply that he was often reluctant to sell them, and many of the instruments, almost exclusively violins, in his sale have not been seen in the open market or in performance for many years, although he often lent them out to talented young players, and they are in excellent playing condition. So just another note there. So he helped musicians by lending instruments, and he also offered advice to kind of students and musicians wanting to buy instruments from auctions as well, which is elaborated a bit more in this other article here, but we will not go into that. So moving on, when Rosenberg died in February 2022, Ingles and Hayday were brought in to assess the collection and discovered its full extent, representing a veritable A to Z of the finest Italian makers, including a 1685 Stradivari, a Marti, Ballesteri, Bergonzi, Cerruti, Galliano, Grancino, Guarneri, Landolfi, Mantegazza, Montanana, Rocca, Scarabotto, Stradivari, and Testore. The presence of several Milanese instruments, 2 Grancinos, 3 Landolfis, a Testore Lavazza, and a Mantegazza viola, and a Scarabato copy of Grancino, indicates his affection for the Milanese school of violin making. Indeed, these instruments are often considered good value players' instruments when in comparison with Cremonese violins. Other makers, including the French Lupo, Viome, and English John Lott. The auction offers a once-in-a-generation chance to see these instruments together. Tim Ingles, one of the directors of Ingles and Hayday, remembers seeing the instruments for the first time. It was a day that all auctioneers dream of, going into somebody's attic and discovering that it's rammed with good instruments. Knowing it was Norman, we knew there would be some treasures, but we didn't know exactly what we'd find. That's one other note to say, that like he was very, from what I hear, like really he lent instruments, and he was very engaging with people and liked to talk about his collection, but no one really knew exactly what he had. He was also kind of a little bit guarded, I think, as to the full extent of his collection. So even though people were aware that he had this really great collection, no one actually knew exactly what he had until obviously Ingles and Hayday went to kind of have a look at what he had. So anyway, moving on. So there was a little door in the corner, half hidden by a bookcase, and Paul had to get down on his hands and knees to access it. He opened it and said, "It's full of violins," and passing back one great violin after another. There were a lot of amazed exclamation. "Wow, it's a great Cerruti. Oh my God, that's a Grancino." It went on like that for about 10 minutes while Paul took these violins out of the cupboard. These discoveries sometimes happen in our world, but the unusual thing about Norman's collection is that there is both quality and quantity. quantity and quality, it said that. He kept it all under his hat though, so most people who went to his house got to see 3 or 4 instruments, and practically no one had ever seen the whole collection. The big reveal will be very exciting. So there you go, that's what I just elaborated on. No one knew the full extent really. Paul Hayday, the other director of Ingles and Hayday, said it was like walking into a toy shop for us. What was lovely was that normally when you go to a client, they give you a rough idea of what you're going to see. On this visit, we had no idea what we'd find, and we had an amazing feeling of discovery each time a great violin emerged from the cupboard. Rosenberg also had a keen eye for bows, and the collection includes 5 Picats as well as bows by Persoit, Mayer, Pajot, Henri and Vorin, and some spectacular English bows by Tubbs and Hills and Sons. Ingles said, "We were both surprised by the quality of Norman's bow collection. I don't think many people associated Norman with collecting bows, so it was another lovely surprise on the day to discover 8 large boxes full of spectacular bows." Well, there you go. I have heard that from some people, that he did know quite a lot about bows as well, and would look at bows at auctions. So that's not too surprising to me, but perhaps most people know him in terms of violins. But anyway, let's have a look at this list, which is kind of high definition, and we can zoom in. So this is the list that he made. I mean, it's possible that maybe there's some corrections to this list when it's looked at, but this is really, really quite fascinating. So we have here, these are violins, then we've got some violas and a cello. So we've got an Antonio Stradivari 1685. Then we've got a Phidias Andrea Guarneri there from 1700, an Andrea Guarneri 1683, Domenico Montagnana 1727, another Montagnana 1740, Lorenzo Storioni 1796, Brothers Armati kind of 16 something, can't quite see there, a Cerruti there, Tommaso Ballesteri, not 1 but 2 but 3, Giovanni Grancino, 2 of those, Carlo Ferdinando Landolfi, 3 of those. Wow. Carlo Antonio Testori, Santino Lavazza there, Michael Deaconet, not 1 but 2, Antonio Gragnani there, brothers, the Carcassi brothers there, kind of Guadagnini there, and Antonio Guadagnini as well. Looks like 2 Carlo Guadagninis there, so that's pretty significant. A Rocca Mariani, and Antonio Mariani, a Fabio Mariani, Gennaro Galliano, I think that's Giuseppe Galliano, and that's Giuseppe and Antonio Galliano, Alessandro Galliano, 2 of those, a Calvarola there, a Bartholomew Calvarola, Giuseppe Marconcini, Vincenzo Postiglione, Andreas Giselberti there, and then we've got Antonio Ghibertini, I think there, Felice Mori Costa, Dom Niccolo Amati, Matteus Albani there, Gaetano Ciocci. I'm probably really pronouncing this quite badly. So these are all really incredible makers there. Gaetano Scarabolto, Giuseppe Scarbi, Cesar Gaeta, Aurelius Aureli, I think it's Fernando Varagnolo as well. This is a very interesting name to see on this list. Philippus Mascioli. So this maker, I think there's not very much information about this maker, but some say that he was like an amateur maker but made like a few instruments, and some do survive. So I'm really curious to see this, because this I hope this comes to the auction and we see what it looks like, because this is quite a rare, interesting maker. So really curious to see that on the list there. Then moving away from Italian instruments, here we have Hendrik Jacobs, so there's a Dutch violin there. J.B. Viome, of course, French. Nicolas Lupo, one of the finest French makers. Then we've got Bernardel, French. Daniel Parker here, so probably the, on paper monetary value, the most valuable English maker. Then we've got Parker and John Hare, maybe it's like a composite or something. So John Hare, another really regarded English maker. Benjamin Banks, amazing maker, looks like an Amati model and a Strad model there. Edward Pamphilian there, another really great early English maker. But what is quite curious to see here is a Jacob Raymond violin. So Jacob Raymond is I think at the moment the earliest known English maker, like a German who moved over to London, and I believe that the oldest surviving instruments in like kind of British instruments are by Jacob Roman. Could be a little bit incorrect there, but I believe that's correct. John Lott, another really fine English maker. We got an Amati and a Guarneri model there. Then moving on to violas, we've got Pietro Mantegazza viola there. Looks like a Storioni viola. Cavalieri viola, and a Jacob Raymond, which would be incredible to see. So some really great stuff. And then going on to cellos, we've got a Deaconet there, Michael Deaconet, looks like Padua there. But yeah, some really great stuff here. For me personally, I really love to see what this Mascioli violin looks like. Really love to see this Jacob Raymond violin and this Jacob Raymond viola. So that'll be really interesting. So the auction, like I said, is coming up in March and June 2023, and of course I'll go through the catalogues as normal. I really encourage people to click on these links here and read this article yourself, both in regards to the sale and the instruments in his collection, and also a bit of a profile of the man himself and some really nice words from some of the kind of his friends, students, because that's really kind of important to cover that. Norman Rosenberg was, as they say, like a fine gentleman and a truly honest person in a field which is often not kind of that always that kind of friendly. So he was a kind of light, a beacon of light, I think, in amongst the darkness, you could say. But anyway, so that was me rambling on about this. Links will be in the description. Definitely check it out. And when these auctions come up, I think this is going to be probably one of the most notable sales of fine violins for a good while, especially because it's come from one collection. So really interesting. So thanks a lot for watching this not so short news bulletin, and I'll catch you next time. Bye. Many thanks for tuning in to the Musical Instrument Investigator. I hope that you enjoyed the video. If you did, then please like, subscribe and turn on notifications, and watch out for the next video coming soon.